On a recent work trip to Baltimore, I had the opportunity to visit the Fort McHenry National Monument and Historic Shrine. What is Fort McHenry, you might ask? Well, if you're unfamiliar with it, it played a key role in the Battle of Baltimore, which inspired our national anthem, the Star Spangled Banner. Fort McHenry sits on a little peninsula jutting out into the Baltimore harbor. It was built during the War of 1812 because Baltimore was considered a prime target of the British, and they knew that in order to protect the city and really the country as a whole, they needed to protect the harbor and protect the British from invading Baltimore. In early September of 1814, the British sailed on Washington, D.C. and burnt the White House. They then sailed for Baltimore, hoping to attack and capture that as well. Beginning at dawn on September 13th, the British bombed Baltimore Harbor and Fort McHenry. For over 25 hours, more than 1,800 rounds of shells and rockets were fired on the fort. Miraculously, there were only a handful of casualties, considering the number of shots that were fired on the fort. But the valiant men that were manning Fort McHenry fought back. They fired their own guns out into the harbor, while the Americans' cannons were not powerful enough to reach the British ships that were about 2 miles out in the harbor. What they were able to do was prevent the ships from coming any closer to land, effectively warding them off so that they couldn't fire directly on the fort and actually make the invasion. And so after 24 hours, the British gave up and essentially sailed away. So you might ask, where does the Star Spangled Banner come in? Well, the author of our national anthem, Francis Scott Key, happened to be a prominent young lawyer who had been sent a few days earlier to negotiate the release of an American hostage. And while they were successful in that negotiation, by the time that they were done negotiating, the British had decided to invade Baltimore. And to prevent Francis Scott Key and his companions from warning Baltimore of the attack, they kept them on what's known as a treaty ship and kept them stationed out in the harbor. So he had to watch the entire attack on Baltimore from this ship. And on the morning of September 14th, by the dawn's early light, he watched the general at the fort raise the American flag over the fort to signify victory. This inspired Francis Scott Key, not only a lawyer but also well known for his poems, to compose a few lines recognizing the significance of this event. That poem was printed in the paper the next day. It became very popular, eventually put to song, and 1931 became our official national anthem. Today at the fort, you can visit the ramparts and you can visit the barracks and walk around and see where the cannons once stood and imagine yourself fighting back for your country against this invasion of the British. And well, actually, most the ramparts and the walls and everything are original, and most of the buildings have original foundations or portions of them. But the fort itself has been used multiple times, so it wasn't just during this battle. It was reused again during the Civil War and during World War I, served as an army hospital. So many of the buildings kind of were reconstructed, built onto, added onto, demolished. So while you still get a good look and feel of what the fort is today and what it was, we have to remember that it was a working fort, and so it has seen many different uses over the years. But today you can walk into some of the barracks, you can see what the officers' quarters look like, you can even see some of the foundations for the old army hospital and even in a tavern that stood on the grounds right outside the fort's walls. All of this is visible today, as well as the reconstructions and replicas of all the cannons that were once around the fort and firing back. There's quite a few artifacts on displays or replicas of artifacts, things that they have found during archaeological digs, such as buttons or gun shells, silverware, all those various things that kind of tell the history of what was there at the fort over the years that it was in existence. One of the coolest things that I found on display and one of the coolest artifacts is the original cross beams that were once buried about 16 feet underground and held the flagpole. The flagpole was so tall in order to be seen and to fly the flags and be, steady in the winds, that this crossbeam was buried super far underground. And during a recent archaeological dig, they uncovered that original crossbeam, and it is now on display in one of the buildings on the grounds. So that's really cool. What that also signified was they originally had the wrong location of the flagpole. They had it more in the center of the fort, and they discovered that by finding that crossbeam, it was actually closer to the front entrance. So when you visit the fort today, the flagpole is in its original location. It is a replica, but you can see both the location and the crossbeam on display. Another interesting tidbit of information we learned is that the fort flies anywhere from 3 to 4 different sizes of flags. And this is because that's due to the weather, wind conditions, the number of staff that are on hand, because the larger the flag, the more people it takes to be able to hold and hoist and lower the flag. And so they do have a replica of the original 30 by 42 foot flag, but it takes a lot of people to man. And so they only put it up on special occasions. And the day we visited was not such a special occasion. And so we got to see one of the smaller flags being flown, but it's still just very awe-inspiring to stand there on the grounds, look around and really feel the place in history that this, Fort McHenry really took, and to understand what Francis Scott Key felt and saw when he watched that flag being hoisted over American soil. In addition to getting to tour the actual fort itself, there is a small little inside museum where there's a video that you can watch, and there's other artifacts on display. There's a whole history of Francis Scott Key, his birth, what led him to his position, and other things later in life. So make sure you check that out. What's not on display at the fort is the original flag, because the original flag is located in the Smithsonian Museum in Washington, D.C., not very far away. We have been there. We have seen that original flag. It is very inspiring and just so cool that they were able to preserve it. If you ever see pictures of it or you get to see it yourself, you'll know that there are pieces missing of it because everybody wanted a piece of it as a souvenir. So there are holes and missing stars, but the fact that we have it at all is quite impressive. So make sure that you get to the Smithsonian to check it out, as well as getting to Fort McHenry in Baltimore. If you have a national park pass, you can get in free with that. Otherwise, there is a small charge for visitation. But they've got, like I said, the small museum. They've got a walking path around the fort that you can walk. There's benches, so you can kind of hang out for the day and just look at the harbor. There's really not much shade, so make sure if it's on a hot summer day like when I visited that you're going to want a hat, sunglasses, sunscreen, and a bottle of water because Baltimore can get very hot and muggy in the summer. If you find yourself in the Baltimore area, I highly recommend you check out Fort McHenry. But then again, I recommend that you check out any national park, lakeshore, battlefield, historic site, what have you, because we love those and we think you should too. So no matter where you find yourself in your travels, and no matter which national park you visit, keep on trekking, and we'll see you out there.